Okay, good morning everyone. We've just started recording. We had a few technical hitches, but we are here now. We haven't quite got Robin on the call yet, but when he does, we'll make him a co-host as well. Right. I presume everyone's reeling from the impact of yesterday's announcements and what it's meaning for us as business, particularly business directors who are on dividends or directors loan, because that is, we're definitely falling through the gaps at the moment. Trudy is working her socks off trying to work out what it means and what options we might have, if any.
Not many at the moment, but I'll come up with something, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's pretty much looking like we are going to be looking like a package of things to help us through this, and no one specific offer, it looks like, for us. So, obviously, as you've seen, we've had problems with this call already. Bear with us. We're going to be trying to share our presentation with you, and as we've muted you all, or you've muted yourselves, if you can use the chat for any questions, that'll be really great. Then we can make sure we address queries as we're going through. And we really want to be more of a discussion where we can, so feel free to unmute when we get into the sort of question section, look at discussion, answer as many questions as we can. Okay, I'm just double check, see if Robin's pops up yet. Not yet, no. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen with you. With me, share screen, beginning, and okay, where's my, there it is. Okay, can people see cash flow presentation now?
Yes.
Judy, you can talk, can you tell me?
Hang on a minute.
Can
yes,
you see?
I can see it.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got a few slides to talk through to give this some structure, but we really want to get into, I think what we all need to know is, we kind of know what support there is or isn't out there. What do we actually do on a practical level to help us through this? So we've got a few key steps. Just make sure that's in the presentation mode. There we go. Step one, quite a few people we talk to haven't done this yet. Make sure you've done your own personal cash flow plan. It's really important that your starting point as the owner is what you need personally. So going through your personal cash flow forecast, what's got to go out the bank, what you can defer, what you can cancel, and what actually do you need to live on? What's the minimum you need to draw out of your business during the next few weeks and couple of months? And then do your business cash flow forecast. Again, it's really, really important that you've got this down and on a spreadsheet. Don't try and juggle this in your head. Don't try and juggle it on bits of paper. Get it in a spreadsheet where you can keep updating it, keep working through different scenarios. As you find out about different client situations, you can update your plan. And it's really important that you know that you're hopefully your most likely scenario, but also your very worst case. What's your worst case? So if, I know several people on this call have literally zero income coming in now, lots of businesses are completely closed down. You know, your worst case scenario then is around debtor income, of what's going to be coming in debtor wise, of what you've already billed in previous months. So really work out your absolute worst case scenario, because that's what you need to create your plan for, to know that if the worst happens, you've got a way to get through this. Then quantify that cash flow gap. Once you've worked out what that's going to be, we're going to look at what the likely and worst case is, and then really what are the options to fill it. And we potentially are looking at, if you're a director, a basket of different measures, not one obvious thing here. Now we're going to just talk through what your personal boundaries or orders of preference of those things might be. So what things are you willing to do? You know, are you willing to borrow? Are you willing to use your buffer cash? Where are your boundaries? And create some kind of plan around that. And then get your trigger points in of, if that happened, we do this. If this happened, we do the other. And then keeping that plan updated continually. Anybody got any questions on that so far? Not that where's the chat box?
How many people have actually done that? How many have actually gone through your personal cash flow first and then the business afterwards? Saw Noel putting your hand up. Did you work out that you can actually live on a lot less money than you think you can? Because I know when I did it, all the things that were essential 8 weeks ago really aren't. I don't need a cleaner. I don't, you don't need half of the stuff. You certainly don't need Sky Sports at the moment. And so I was quite encouraged at how little, by the time you've postponed your mortgage, you actually need. And as Serena said, that's your starting point, really. How much do you need to take out of the business is the minimum that you can possibly live on. I think the business cash flow is possibly a bit more complicated. How did everyone get along with that?
Feel free to unmute, guys, if you want to join in.
Yeah, does anyone still need help with that?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Helen, yeah.
Oh, I've been trained so well.
Hi, Helen.
Hi, I've been trained so well in all of this. I'm so lucky. Yeah, I'm okay.
Good.
My cash flow's okay.
Good.
Excellent. Good.
I have cash. I'm not bragging about that. I'm looking at it all the time. Yeah, and there's stuff potentially coming in. I've slashed all my costs that I can, but I've been thinking about this for a few weeks now. I thought this would happen. And again, I've slashed my personal, I've looked at my minimum personal costs. So yeah, I feel comfortable with it. I'm looking to find new income now. That's my goal at the moment.
Yeah, we were talking about on our call this morning about, I think week 3 is moving into, well, how do I now earn some more money? Let's go move into practical mode and get out of the sort of fear and reaction we've had this week.
Yeah. So
I think that's a great place, Helen, to be, to a point where you're actually comfortable with where you are. Okay, yes, it's horrific, but if we can be comfortable with this new normal and say, I've got a plan, I know I'll be okay, that's a great place to get to.
Yeah, I'm okay. Thanks to your input before. Thanks to Trudy. I'm okay. And my business is not uncomplicated in terms of its income stream. And, it's not a very big business, but it's got all the other things to think about. I don't really want to put off paying my VAT. I don't really want that hanging over me. Obviously, I've got some decisions to make when I get guidance from Trudy because it's my end of year. So there's a lot of stuff that I'm putting off deciding about until you've explored the options further.
Yeah.
And I know how I should manage everything. So
okay, that's great.
It's a later conversation.
Cool. Okay, I think we'd say on that VAT front, what I personally would, my personal view on that is, I'd rather hold on to my VAT, keep it in a separate bank account.
Sorry, my son's asking me for something.
Just mute, Helen. On the VAT front, what I would say is I'm not going to pay my VAT, but I'm going to keep it in a separate account because I don't want to be building it against me.
Just hold it.
Just keep it in case you need it. Just keep it.
Okay, yeah, that's a good idea. I just don't want to spend it. I don't want to think of it as cash.
No, separate bank account.
Anything you don't pay, rent, rates, anything that you don't pay. If you have got the cash to pay it, don't pay it. Put it in a separate account so it's there. This is all over.
Okay.
The big unknown now is how long this is going to go on for.
Yeah, I know.
That's fine, but if it goes into 3-4 months, you're going to need that money.
Yeah, and they might change the rules. They might decide to push it back. They might decide to be more flexible. Yeah.
Don't part with any cash right now at all.
Okay.
The key rule on all of this is conserve cash.
Yeah. Okay.
Conserve cash is.
If they've given you an opportunity, take it for now, but just keep it to one side.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Keep cash.
That's good.
Okay, right. Moving on then. So cash flow forecasting. We've said before, use a spreadsheet. Make sure you've got this where you can update it constantly, keep it live, very, very important. Put in all your costs and your known income. Someone's typing away quite noisily. Can everyone mute, please, if they're not a host? So there's a lot of keyboard noise being picked up somewhere. Thanks. Now, I think if you've got a business where you've got invoiced customers, this is a trickier one. Debtor income going forward. We can't assume we're going to get paid by everybody. And I think you really need to look at some detail at your customers and your customers' customers to see where their pinch points are going to be coming. I've had a lot of clients who on last Friday thought things were going to be fine, and things tightened up really quickly on Monday, Tuesday, where people started dropping off. Looking at their clients, where's their pressure coming from? If their revenue stream dries up, they're going to stop paying you. So my advice there would be is go on the worst case. If there is any doubt over someone who might pay you, especially your big customers, take it out of your cash flow. You've got to know you get through the worst case, not a plan that gets you there if everything goes well.
Yeah.
Debtor, creditors, so these are people that you owe money to in your business. You need to make sure you've got a plan to manage those. Please make sure you're communicating. You don't want pressure piling up where people are ringing you and emailing you and you're dodging the calls. We're all in this together. Talk to them and just be really honest. Obviously think about who you need if you need to keep supply running. Who is going to be really hurting if you don't pay them? If you are having to prioritise something, can you prioritise someone who's going to be really hurt by it? Especially if they're in this kind of director situation where they are going to not have an income stream. Obviously, what can you cut or defer? I would say defer anything and everything you can, and by all means put that cash aside if you don't want to spend it. That's what I'm doing, putting my VAT away, putting my corporation tax, everything I can. I don't want to spend it, but it's there if things get bad. And find out what you can claim. This is obviously a bit of a minefield. Quite a lot of fact has emerged this week on what you can claim. The grants from the councils are still quite fuzzy, and I'm talking to Paul Humphreys at D2N2 later to try and get clarification on what he knows about that. Some people have been offered it, like Newark and Sherwood have been very upfront with getting that out to people. Other councils haven't done the same. Obviously, that only affects you if you've got premises. Find out what you're likely to get, and again, assume a worst case on that if you're not sure right now. Huge unknowns, of course, around the director's dividend point of things. Any questions on that so far?
I think my only question, and again, I can wait for Trudy at some point, is if I've got director's loan, I think there's an option to maybe I should be thinking about putting it back in, some of it. I don't know. That's a
salary.
Pardon?
Do you mean a salary?
Well, obviously I've got my salary, and then I've taken some during the year, so I've got some director's loan with a dividend yet to be decided. So I was thinking, what is the optimum combination? Like, how much is it better to keep is it better to have the money in my savings account, my personal savings account, or put it back in the business so that I've got an income?
I think each case
that makes sense.
Yeah, I think each case is going to have a different answer, unfortunately. Because
so I'm just going to wait on that one. It's fine. Don't feel you have to answer that now.
No, I mean, Helen, I'll call you after this call and we can go through your personal situation. But what I'm doing is a general synopsis of what I think you should be looking at if you're a director and you have minimum salary and dividends.
Okay.
And that will come out today.
Yeah.
I can give general advice, but I cannot give individual tax advice unless you're my client. So for people that aren't a client of ours, then the first port of call will be your own accountant, but I can give general pointers as to what I think you should be asking that accountant to look at for you. So that will go up onto the group later today.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you,
In
Jude.
progress. It's been a big topic, just working out whether directors are seen as employed or self-employed, or whether they can have variable pay or fixed pay. And, you know, I've had to go through quite a big process just to get to what will probably be about 6 lines of advice. So it will come out today, so just bear with me on that one.
Yeah, but that key point, we had our sort of leadership call at 10:30 this morning, and what we've realised is that every situation is pretty unique. Everyone's got a different set of circumstances, and we just can't be into general advice that's going to fit all. We can issue the guidelines, but it's going to be talk to your accountant for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
All in different situations. So next step then, once you know when you see what your cash flow looks like, you're going to see at the bottom, there's going to be a line at the bottom that's going to say if you're going to go into negative and how much cash you're going to need. You then need to think about what those options are going to be for you personally. The first one for a lot of companies is going to be that government support. If you've got staff and if you're furloughing people, we know, there's a lot of factor around that. We know you can furlough, we know you can get the 80% support. If you're on the Facebook group, there's a brilliant video by the leading employment law barrister in the country on there. He's incredibly detailed about what the furloughing means. It's an awesome video if you've not seen it. Then you've got, obviously, if you're self-employed, you've got the support avenues that came out yesterday. There's the government grants, there's the rent, there's the VAT, there's a lot of things. Make sure you're crystal clear on what support you can get and that you know how to get them. There are lots of links are on our Facebook page again of the key links you need to access that support. But bear in mind the timing issue on these. You know, we're looking at end of May, we think, for furlough staff support, June, end of June for any personal self-employed support. So we've got to think about that gap and how do we fund that gap in the meantime. And this is where it gets very personal. You've got to know what your options are, and then you've got to decide what routes of finance have you got available to you and which ones are you comfortable with. And I'd be inclined to get some kind of order of priority of what you'd be prepared to consider in what circumstances. So would you, for example, be prepared to consider personal debt? Would you be prepared to use your bank overdraft? Would you be prepared to get a bank overdraft extension? Are you prepared to use bank debt through overdraft or through the bank funding scheme? I know Robin can talk just more in a bit about the options around the guarantees that the banks are or were asking for. Are you prepared to use your credit cards? Are you prepared to borrow? They're all going to be, I think we were chatting yesterday about the banking side of things. There's going to be like a second tier funding coming out very, very quickly for people who can't access the first and second lines of support. You know, can you refinance assets? Can you get invoice financing? There are going to be so many options, but it's a question of you being prepared to know what will you do? What are you prepared to get into? Do you want to take on debt, or would you rather make do without? Obviously, use your VAT money, use your corporation tax money. Do not pay that. Keep it, and you've got it just in case you need it. If you've got buffer cash, how much are you prepared to go into that by? Everyone knows me, I'm the queen of buffer cash, but I don't want to touch it. I'm probably going to have to, that's going to hurt. And personal savings. You know, this is just like get a list together of what routes to finance you've got and what it would take for you to have to trigger them. I've got a client who did an awesome phased plan of like, if this happens, we'll do these things. If this happens, we'll do these things. And it's just very helpful that they've already got their trigger points laid out. It's going to take away that future panic, and all that headspace gets freed up because you've got a plan. So I really recommend you do that. So you've got some kind of action plan, and you can then proceed and go into week 3 next week and start being positive and proactive again. I think come out of this panic we've all been in this week.
I think also with the cash flow, just what I'm finding with my clients is that, okay, we might have, I've got a client who's a restaurant, so he might have 3 months with no income whatsoever.
Yeah.
But then in month 4, when he opens again, who knows whether he's going to go back to previous levels. It could take 6 months before actually you're back to the previous level of income that you had, but your fixed costs could come back straight away the day you open.
Really good point.
And also for something like a restaurant, they're going to need to buy stock on day 1, which they may not, you know, they're going to need an injection of cash to do that. Yeah. So I would say, as Serena said, look at your worst case. You're going to be shut for longer than you think. Then your income is going to come back slowly, but your fixed costs will come back before the income to match it. So the amount of cash you think you need, you probably need a lot more. And going to the bank now and get more than you need is absolutely fine, because if you take one of these loans and in 6 months' time you've got a spare 20 grand in the bank, you don't need it, you can just pay it back without any extra fees. So I would say go for the most cash you think you're going to need, as long as you're comfortable with borrowing that, and then you know you're covered until this is all over. I don't know what your thoughts on that are, Serena.
I think that's a brilliant point. I think we have to assume, as we've said on previous calls, we have to assume we emerge from this into a very deep recession. It is the likely case we're not being doom and gloom, but our point is plan for that worst case. Don't think on day 1 you're going to bounce back. When I know Noel, I see you're on the call, I know that all your exhibitions have been pushed back. I mean, hopefully you are going to bounce back into a lot of pent-up demand. But again, there's an assumption of will all your customers and their customers have the cash to leap back into exhibitions? We've got to make some very reasonable and fairly worst case predictions on this, I think, because like you say, we're not going to leap back. I think some industries are going to have so much pent up demand that things will bounce back quickly, but you've got an entire global population who are going to be on reduced income and are going to be struggling to get back on their feet. So just like make sure you plan for that scenario. It's not just a 3-month blip and we're back to normal.
The issue we've got is that all the events that have been cancelled for the next 3 months, or in fact now one that was cancelled out of March and put into July at Excel, which is now the big hospital, now been moved to March 2021.
Oh God, really?
Yeah, so we're going to see a lot of that, and I think my gut feeling is that we were anticipating being back up and running in July. Realistically now that's looking at September.
Wow, is that?
If then. So we had that promise of future business as such, in that we've signed contracts with people but they're not paying us. The issue we're going to have then is capacity at the other end, because we're already really busy that time of year anyway.
Yeah.
And so we've got to cram all of these events that are pushed out from Q2 into Q3 and 4, without technically recognising the income for it, because we might recognise some of it already because we've done most of the work.
Yeah.
So, yeah, how long do we need to bankroll it for is difficult, and literally nobody at all is paying us. Nobody.
Really?
Yeah. And now if they turn the NEC for the big issue we've got, whilst it's great for the nation to create these massive emergency hospitals, our industry is losing its shop floor basically.
Yeah.
So no one's going to be able to get back and doing exhibitions if they're all being used as temporary hospitals. So just delay any return for a longer period.
I think this opens up a great conversation for next week, is how maybe people start to pivot or innovate or find other ways to make money, because, and we don't know, this could come back in waves. We could go back into lockdown periods. They're talking about just managing the flow, aren't they? Which this is just such an unknown. It's going to change for everyone. But I think, week 3 feels like a good time to start talking about, pivoting, innovation and moving forward. But I mean, like I say, for you, Noel, the furlough thing lasts for 3 months. What if it's 4 or 5? Is there more government support? We're just not going to know that yet, of course.
No, but they've alluded to it, though, haven't they? They've said he did say if he needs to extend it, he will.
Yeah.
And I can't see any scenario where they won't have to extend that.
Yeah, I agree.
So
I think it's really just got to get your plan together and just spend some time to think through what a come back to work looks like for your business and your industry and for your customers. Is it going to be a slow and steady thing? Is it going to bounce back? I mean, the pubs and restaurants might be packed to bursting when we get back out there when we can, or people might not have any cash to go out and eat, or somewhere in between. So we have to think of that, the logic of all of that, I think. I think once you've got...
They're getting 80% of their income, they're deferring their mortgages, they can't go out and spend it.
That's true.
Disposable money than they had before.
Yeah, and we could see a huge boom in that sector. People are desperate to get out of the house and spend some money.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
I'll be at the queue.
Sorry?
I'll be at the front of the queue.
I'll invite you for it. Okay, I would say on that thing when we're talking about cutting costs is definitely think about, I think your personal pension is a really obvious place to hit there. A lot of directors are lucky enough to be able to put sometimes thousands a month away. That's a really good one to cut if you can, just to keep that cash in the bank. You can always top it up later. And I think on the worst case scenario, just if you have still got income stream, just keep planning forward of what if things do fall by X%. Like if it falls by 25% or 50%, what would you do? And then once you've got that plan, I think you can relax, if you can use the word relaxed at the moment, into knowing you've got some kind of plan, and just take away that anxiety and fear, because that anxiety and fear is going to stop you thinking clearly, and it's going to stop any creativity. It shuts those parts of the brain down. So we really want to try and keep in a very good place if we can. So but then the obvious question is, you do your plan and it doesn't stack up and you can't see a way to fund it. And that's where Robin, the lovely Robin, corporate troubleshooter and insolvency expert, comes in.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Serena. Yeah, it's a difficult situation at the moment, because the ordinary, and Darren, I've just been in the process of typing a response to you, Darren, which I'll finish once I've finished speaking. It's a difficult situation because on the one hand, you'll be looking at your own position, your own debtors, and your own ability to collect in money. And it may be that is the difference. Your ability to collect in debts is the difference between your survival or failure as a business. And in those circumstances, what options have you got to go after those debtors who are unable to pay? The ordinary course of events would be something along the lines of attempting to have a discussion with them, attempting to work out a payment plan or some other way of making sure that you get the funding. But failing that, then there would be a 7-day letter, as we call it, a letter setting out exactly what the debt is, how it was accrued, when it was due for payment, and that it hasn't been paid, and making a demand for payment. And if that payment isn't made in 7 days, then we're either going to sue you or take other steps, which would lead to, among other things, either high court enforcement or attempting to wind the debtor up. All of this is costly, all of this is time consuming, and in the current circumstances, it's highly unlikely to get you any result anyway, because the High Court announced that it was adjourning all existing winding up petitions for hearings in June or beyond. So in other words, that final port of call that you would have been able to threaten a debtor with to try and get payment out of them, of being able to sue them and then issue a winding up petition, now isn't available to you because the courts won't hear that for several months. And there's also, although it's speculation, so we haven't put it on the site yet, there's also speculation that the government is going to change the insolvency laws specifically to protect debtors, so that people can't take that kind of draconian enforcement action against them. Which means that you're left in a situation where you've done everything Serena and Trudy have said, and you've looked at the cash flow and you've got your numbers, and there's a negative. At that point, you have to start having those conversations as a debtor with your creditors to see how many of them you can put off, to see how many of them you can work out plans with, so that you're conserving as much cash to be able to continue at this stage and for as long as you possibly can. It's fundamentally important to address the question of the survival of your business head on, and to communicate with your creditors. I can't stress it enough that most of the time when I specialize in turnaround, my job is to try and avoid businesses going into insolvency, but almost all the time the businesses that I meet far too late. I meet at the point where their only option really is a formal insolvency process. By communicating with your creditors, by communicating with the other stakeholders, by being creative and finding ways of conserving cash and generating income as best you can, and living on what you have, you buy yourself the time to be able to turn the business around, to be able to ride the wave. And communication is key in that. So number one thing, communicate with all the stakeholders concerned, your bank, your creditors. Most of them are going to be pretty sympathetic to the situation you're in at the moment. Banks get a bad rep, and I've been slagging them off a bit in the way they're dealing with the CBIL loans situation. I'll come to that. But the way they run their business is by pricing the risk of your default. If they know that there is a problem and they are in a position to help you, they will do so, because that is what's going to protect their loan and give them the best chance of being paid back. It's when you don't communicate with them, it's when you don't give them information, it's when you don't answer their calls, that they start to get suspicious. They think you're hiding something from them, they panic, and then they bring up the drawbridge. Then they start doing things like calling in the loan and making life more difficult for you. So communicate is the first thing. The second thing, especially if you are a director in a limited company, at the point at which you look at your cash flow and you see that there is little prospect of the business avoiding an insolvency process, then your duties as a director change. You stop having fiduciary duties to the company, and you start having fiduciary duties to your creditors. A lot of people who run small businesses are either joint directors or sole directors. It's very easy to think of the business as mine, to blur the lines between being a director and being the owner of this business. A limited company has its own identity. It is its own being, if you like. And that means that your duty as a director is to the best interests of the company most of the time. Well, that's me. I own it. Until you can't realistically avoid an insolvency process. And at that point, the law says your duties are to your creditors. So at that point, you have to start thinking about every decision you make where cash is paid out of the business. Are you putting one creditor in a better position than another? Every time that you look to sell an asset, or somebody says to you, you owe me a lot of money, but if you give me your van, I'll write the debt off. That's, unless it's for market value and justified, potentially putting a creditor in a better position than all the other creditors, a preference. That transaction can be reversed in an insolvency. Or it's a transaction at an undervalue if you give them a van worth £5,000 to clear a £3,000 debt. All of these things are wrong, and all of these things can come back to bite you as a director. So if you're in the situation where you think that you're unlikely to avoid an insolvency unless something drastic happens, you need to take advice. You need to consider your position. You need to consider your duties and your responsibilities as a director. How does this apply? And that advice should come from your lawyer in the first case and an insolvency practitioner. Accountants with the best will in the world are very, very helpful when the business is going very well, but very few of them have insolvency knowledge, and it's a specialist field. Licensed insolvency practitioners, clues in the name, have to be licensed. They have to have gone through certain training. So this advice usually comes from an insolvency lawyer or from an insolvency practitioner. If you're a sole trader, or if you're a partner in a partnership, a traditional partnership, so not an LLP, again, you have to consider your creditors in these circumstances. But more importantly, as an individual, your liability is unlimited. In individual sole traders, partners in traditional partnerships don't have the protection of limited liability that you have in a limited company or in a limited liability partnership. And so the consequences of an insolvency could be more serious for the individual. That said, again, the earlier you get advice, the earlier you communicate with your creditors, the earlier you speak to insolvency practitioners and lawyers about these matters, the better your chance of surviving. There is always a way out of these things, or if there isn't, there is a way to mitigate the damage as much as possible. And that comes from advice, planning, knowledge, and communication. That all sounds really horrible, doesn't it? I get to talk about all the awful stuff. But it's very, very important that if you have these worries, that you take advice early and that you communicate with the stakeholders early. That's about all I've got to say on the worst case for the time being. But I just wanted to, Serena mentioned the business continuity loan scheme earlier, and there's been quite a bit in the press about the banks looking to get personal guarantees from directors or to take forms of security in order to shore up their position in granting those loans. And there's been a bit of a backlash on that, given that the government is guaranteeing 80% of each loan anyway. I am hearing now from reliable sources that the big four banks have agreed that they won't look for personal guarantees from directors for loans under £250,000, which is probably going to be the majority of the people in this group. So it's approach with caution, as with any debt, but it's looking like they're seeing clarity. The banks, they're seeing that actually they can't take the usual security that they would look to take, and so that might be an option now for some people. But as always, approach debt with caution.
Is anyone here looking at using bank debt to fund this?
No, but I'm looking at it for quite a few clients, and I've actually got an interview with someone this afternoon who's has much more knowledge than I do. The only thing that I'm getting initially is when we're applying for these loans, the amount of information the bank want is incredible. And the big thing is they're saying the business has to be shown to be viable before coronavirus. And to do that, they want management accounts and year-end accounts and so much information, which is fine if you're a client of ours and we do that for you. But there's an awful lot of people out there who only have their accounts done once a year. So it's going to cost them significant sums of money to get their accountant to actually just prepare the application. There's no guarantee that they'll get that money. So I'm going to update the group later on this when I found out a bit more about it, because I think it's a bit unfair. The banks are asking for so much information in this time of crisis. They just need to have a mechanism where they can get a quick answer and get the money in people's bank within a few days.
Especially as we're talking now about end of March payroll for a lot of people. End of March payroll, end of April payroll.
Rent quarter.
Rent quarters, absolutely. Yeah, so there's a lot of immediate pressure on this, and yeah, don't know where that's going to go.
Gemma, the Rural Business Awards, I'm actually, I've just got the forms actually from NatWest for the civil, the loan scheme.
Oh yeah.
You'll know for us, for the Rural Business Awards, we've just finished the national final. We were just on the cusp of all the renewals for the next year, and they've all disappeared. Answering any emails, but the one thing that they haven't actually officially confirmed is about the personal guarantee, and I think if that's what they will do, it won't really be an option for. But you are right in that the form that they've sent through, I've started filling it out, and that the amount of information they need is absolutely incredible.
Oh no, and without an accountant, it's going to be very hard to do it.
I mean, luckily we're quite organised, but it's testing us, to be honest.
But Robin, can I ask Robin, can I ask a question? So at the point where people have done their cash flow and they're going, oh, there's a gap here, and I'm either not prepared to take on that level of debt, especially with the risk of PG, personal guarantee, or they're just thinking, this is not looking good, I don't know how I make this work. What should they do at that moment?
Sorry, the dogs are going crazy.
Seem to have lost Robin.
That's what they should do at the moment. Just leave the room.
I keep getting a cat sharking across my screen, which is really amusing.
No, it's the postman has chosen this moment to arrive, so the dogs have all gone crazy as a result. Yeah. So Serena, your question was that the moment they discover that there's a gap.
Yeah, and they're thinking, I just don't know how I'm gonna get through this.
Well, I mean, it's going to vary according to individual circumstances. It depends on the size of the gap. It depends on how much we're talking about. I mean, if it's, if there's a shortfall of a couple of grand over a month, then that's usually something that can be overcome either with a bit of creative revenue generation, and I know we're going to be talking about ideas for that next week. Or literally about taking all of the, a list of all of the creditors and just working out with them how things can be moved around and juggled, so that so that you get the time to fill that gap or allow that gap to fall through. I mean, unless it's something more significant than that, then I don't think we're talking about a terminal situation. And that's the difference. I mean, so many times I've come across debtors who've considered themselves to be in a really threatened position.
Who's printing?
It's me, I'm afraid.
Okay.
I don't know about. There's somebody else working in this house.
Okay.
And the printer's on Wi-Fi and it's next to me. So
okay,
if it can all go wrong technically, it's going to go wrong right now. So, but yeah, a lot of people, when they're looking at their own situation, their own business, they're fairly myopic about it. I mean, this is a symptom of fight or flight. You find yourself in a situation of panic, and your gaze focuses, and you can only see what's right in front of you.
Yeah. And
so it may be that, having looked at that cash flow forecast and having seen that there is that gap, that you think, right, that's it. I've got no future here. I don't know what to do. And it's because you're looking at it from that simple point of view. The ability to talk to somebody, to get advice, to get perspective on it. Well. And to be able to look at the bigger picture and go, just how serious is this? Just how terminal is this? And having taken that step back and having taken that breath, you will often find that there is a solution. In cases, again, I'm still typing out Darren's my response to Darren's query further up the chat. In circumstances where somebody isn't talking to their stakeholders, isn't talking to their creditors, and basically burying their head in the sand, it's probably because they think that the world is falling apart. But when we're looking at our own debtor book, we're thinking, well, actually, we don't want to shut any of them down. We just want to work out how we're going to get something. Mm-hmm. And so you as a creditor are sitting there going, I don't know how I'm going to face this. I don't know how I'm going to face my creditors. When in fact, your creditors are probably sitting there thinking, if only he would pick up the phone to me, and just talk to me, we could work this out. For them to take action against you, let's say the courts didn't have the backlog they have. Ordinary course of business, somebody comes up to me and says, right, we need to pursue a debt. It's probably going to be a 7-day letter. It's probably going to be a bit of communication, but no payment. It's probably then going to be a claim in the small claims court if it's under £10,000. That's going to take several weeks. You get your judgment. You look at enforcement. Maybe that will work. Maybe it won't. You make a statutory demand for payment. That's 3 weeks. Winding up petition, 6 weeks. I mean, you could be talking 3 or 4 months before, as a creditor, you see your money. So the idea that, I've got a gap in the next 2 months of £10,000 and I don't know how I'm going to fill it. Actually, take a step back and look at everything, and probably getting that money to creditors over the next 3 or 4 months is probably still going to be a better outcome for them than if they tried to sue you and wind you up. So it's perspective and communication.
Hasn't winding up been suspended the next few months? Yeah,
no, it has. I said, assume that hadn't happened, and that would be your timeline. If I issue a winding up petition in the High Court now, under normal circumstances, it's probably 6 weeks before it's heard. Okay. But also, I should say, if anybody actually has a winding up petition against them, from the moment it's been issued, something called Section 127 of the Insolvency Act comes in, which is a prohibition on any disposition of property from a company. So no payments, no selling assets or anything like that without the court's permission. And that's quite important. People think that, well, a winding up petition has been issued, but I still have to trade. Actually, every payment that goes out could be reviewed by a liquidator if the company is wound up. So, as I say, get advice. Always get advice as soon as possible.
There's an interesting thread coming through. We talk about debtors and creditors. I mean, Gary, I don't know if Gary, are you still on the call? Gary Parsons. A shocking email from a telecoms provider. Please contact our credit control team today to pay any historic outstanding balances to avoid suspension of your services and removal of your equipment. Do you know what? Everyone's got to be reasonable in this. People who behave like that deserve to lose their customers. So just think how you're collecting your debts, and think if people are treating you like that, you want to be changing suppliers, because people have a chance to step up and be human and supportive here. That is really shocking. Gary, I hope you're going to sack them off. And David, we actually got David on the call, who's doing the interview with Trudy later. David, have you got any input on the bank situation and the guarantees? David Marshall, are you still with us?
Hi there, just remember to unmute. Can you hear me?
Yeah, got you.
Okay. Yeah, it's all very fluid at the moment. I've heard that Barclays, certainly for loans below 250,000, have joined RBS and NatWest in not seeking personal guarantees. I've also heard, but not seen for certain, that other banks are probably going to follow suit. So that's good news.
Great.
In terms of time frames, I think somebody mentioned time frames earlier. There isn't a special process that I'm aware of that the banks are putting in place to fast track these loans. They're just going to drop into the normal system and get looked at with the usual amount of rigor, and they are going to be absolutely inundated. So in terms of, okay, it's been good that a scheme has been announced early on, but they will be inundated with applications. And so time-wise, I don't think anybody should be relying on it for support in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
If you had to guess, David, what would you think the timeline would be on funds dropping if people were applying, say, next week?
I can only imagine the pandemonium that's going on in the banks at the moment. I mean, we're several days down the line from when a brand new scheme's been announced. It's, even now being fine-tuned, and I think I've had some additional information this morning from the British Business Bank. So they don't even really know what they're working to at the moment. They will be absolutely rammed. They've got less relationship managers than they've had previously. So a lot of people, haven't got a personal contact. It'll be purely done from the forms and the information that's provided. It could be absolutely horrible. I'd like to think it might be 3 or 4 weeks, but they could just seize up with the amount of applications. A lot will just depend on the volume of applications that they get.
Yeah, I guess. So I mean, like, if it could be what, weeks and weeks, couldn't it, before any money starts to come through?
Yes. So I wouldn't rely on having this sort of bank funding, the T-bills bank funding in place in the short term. I think several people have said already about just preserving the cash that you've got, however you do it. I've seen some really good articles written already. We put something on our own website which just sort of runs through all the things that you can do. It's not unique. There are similar articles elsewhere. But really, I'd urge everybody, if you don't pay it away in the first place, you haven't got to raise it somewhere later on.
Yeah.
And particularly with things like VAT and the things that are sort of aren't going to cost you anything in the short term, definitely keep hold of that cash.
Yeah.
And be careful what you pay. You're going to struggle to get paid by everybody that owes you money, and I'm afraid you've got to play that game as well. You don't want to be the one left in the middle that's paid all the creditors and expecting money to come in and finding it's not.
Yeah.
And I do fear maybe that if there is no legal recourse to getting debts paid, will everybody just sit on their hands? Will we have a complete kind of freeze in cash flow?
I have a feeling that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, I do.
Just go into a complete freeze situation.
Yeah, those of us who were around in 2008, 2009, I qualified as an insolvency solicitor in 2009, and everybody thought that I was moving into a boom industry because we were in the middle of a recession, and what was the result? The zombie company phenomenon. It's a difficult tightrope for somebody like me to walk, because I want to see businesses succeed. I want to see businesses turned around. I want to see creditors paid. I don't really want to see insolvencies, but they are a part of the market where there are assets tied up in an underperforming company that could be better used by somebody else to grow. I mean, some of the biggest businesses in the world were started in recessions. IBM, KFC, so on and so forth. So, the opportunity for some businesses to fail and for those assets to be used by other businesses for growth and so on is a part of the machine moving and cash flow moving. In circumstances where nobody's going to be enforced against and no businesses are under threat of insolvency, you could have a complete stagnation of the market. And that's much, much more difficult to get out of on the other side.
Yeah, I'm just picking up on a point that Darren's put on the thread there about, just being quite robust with your debtors and threatening legal action. I don't know what the legal position on that. I mean, my personal feeling is if you do that, you're going to risk losing your customers. I think threatening customers is a way to go here.
Yeah, well, the issue, I think, is that in circumstances, Darren, on the chat, Darren's issue was that he had tried to communicate with the debtor and they hadn't responded at all and they were burying their heads in the sand. I mean, the point is, if they won't talk to you and be nice, you're going to have to do something to try and drag them to the table.
Yeah.
And the likelihood that is a threat of legal action, because what else do you have? Otherwise, that customer is getting away with not treating you right. And I think there's a real balance there, Serena, between, being nice to your customers and to your creditors, to your debtors, sorry, and saying, I want to try and help you, but I also need you to pay me something. I think and them taking the mickey.
Yeah, just a plea for a conversation. I think, so we don't want to threaten you. We just really, really want to talk to you, because we're going to risk losing. Wow. What was that? We're going to risk losing people if we're not careful. But it is a massive balance, and we've got to survive, haven't we? Just a point Gary again raised on here. PAYE as well. Don't pay that. Defer that too. Any chance you've got to keep cash in your business, keep it. And with your VAT. Right, Trudy, have you got anything else on that?
No, not really. Just to say that the government haven't said you can defer PAYE, but I would actually completely agree with you. Just don't pay it, because I've got loads of clients that get behind on PAYE, and I'm sure they'll just be amenable to agreeing payment plans.
Yeah, I think Gary mentioned in the thread that they've been told that they'd heard that you could defer your POA if you ring up and get a deferment.
The key is to talk to them, I think,
Yeah.
get on the phone so that they know that you're trying your hardest and to come up with a solution.
Yeah, cool, okay. So just to recap then what we've covered is, everyone see the screen share, okay? Yeah, so get your personal cash flow done, do your business cash flow, get it on a spreadsheet, don't try and do it in your head, plan your worst case scenario, and then quantify that cash gap. Quantify the cash gap on your worst case scenario, and do not assume we bounce back out of this in 3 months' time. And then look at what your options are. Bearing in mind all those timing things we've heard about, that cash is not going to be coming in the short term. Actually, David and Robin, have you got any thoughts of, if people can't wait those several weeks it'll take to get cash, and they need cash, what are the best ways to go?
David?
Okay, well, I suppose another thing that I'd add to your list to start with would be talk to your bank. Even though things might not be going great, they'd rather hear earlier than later that things aren't going great. And you'll also feel better because you've shared the burden rather than just keeping it all kind of bottled up yourself. A lot depends on the size of the problem and the size of your business. If it's a relatively small problem, as far as the bank sees it, in relation to your business, then they will be, provided you go to them with a proposal rather than just a problem, and suggest something to them. You might not get exactly what you're looking for, but you might get more than you've got at the moment. So talk to your bank and make sure, as far as possible, that you've got information to support your case. I appreciate that for smaller businesses where accounts are only produced maybe once a year, that's going to be a bit more stretching, but pull together whatever information you can have about the condition of your business at the moment, and also go to them with a forecast. Now, for smaller businesses, a lot of banks will start just with a cash flow forecast. It'd be great to have integrated cash flow, balance sheet, P&L, but at the moment, this is crisis management, and so if you've got a bit of a tight spot at the moment, then go to them at least with a cash flow forecast and have a discussion.
Brilliant, thank you. That's really good advice there. And then I think finally, I have to go back into. Sorry, bear with me. It's about taking action now. So don't put this off. Let's make this week the big planning week. If you haven't done your planning, please get it done today over the weekend. You can't move forward until you know exactly where you are and what problem you might be facing. Cut and defer whatever you can now. Conserve cash as your absolute top priority. Communicate with anyone involved, debtors, creditors. Diffuse that pressure of people calling you and chasing you, because that is horrible to deal with. And take advice early. And just don't leave it too late to save your business. I think most things are overcomable if you deal with it up front. If you put your head in the sand, you reduce your options massively. Anyone got any questions then after that? Anything we've not covered? Helen?
I've just got one question. I've only just thought of it, actually. I've been paid for a service that I can't now deliver.
Oh.
So I've got some cash in my savings account that belongs to my client, and so it's only when all contract work was stopped that's been that cash can't be spent now, and when I do need to spend it, I need to requote, because the prices of goods will change. So even in 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever, I should really requote for that work, because I could be delivering it at a loss. I don't know what the cost of delivering it will be. So it's just, we don't normally do, in part of my business, we don't normally do domestic garden design, but it's a domestic garden that we've been working on for somebody. And so it's to finish off the project. We've got some money in the bank that she sent. She's been ill herself. So she sent all of her money, not 50%, which is what I asked for. So I've got this money sitting in my savings account that isn't my money. And now I don't know when we'll be able to go and finish the work. And I don't want it as an income for this year. it's not an income, you know, there's no outgoing to sit next to it. There's no, do you know what I mean? I don't want it as a turnover.
Well, from an accounting point of view, that would be deferred income anyway, and that would sit in your balance sheet. And the more issue is, do you hold on to their cash? Robin, thoughts?
I've been discussing it with her.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, what I've been saying to people who hold deposits before is again, you know, offer them the opportunity to keep to let you keep the money and defer the service or the product to a later date. In your case, if you don't feel comfortable doing that because it might cause you a loss in the future, then you're probably best placed to say, look, let's mothball the project at this stage. I'll give you back the money that you'll give. We will settle the account for what's been done up to now, and agree that, so that if nothing ever happened again, she would have paid what you want, but no more.
Yeah.
And then agree to revisit finishing the project and requoting for it later. It largely depends on your relationship, but you know, if the other thing I would worry about is, you know, depending on the terms and conditions in your contract, if you had done a deal with me where you'd quoted for a fixed cost for a service and I'd paid you for that, then I would expect you to, I might expect you to fulfill that contract no matter what. In which case, if circumstances change and it costs you more, that's your problem, not mine.
Yeah.
So it's about your relationship. It's about what the terms are of the contract between you, and it's about what you can between you decide that's going to work for everybody. Either cut it all now and revisit it later, or let it sit, but run the risk that it might cost you more in the future.
Great point, and thanks. Anybody else? Any questions? Barry, you got something?
Oh gosh.
Well,
Is that better?
Yes.
Just a general view on, given that at the moment we're not really sure what is available in the future for directors and pay and sales via a mix of dividends, salary, and maybe directors' loans. But just maybe if Robin had any thoughts on furloughing as a director's legal responsibilities versus the advantages you might get by furloughing. It's just a general point. It might not be the right forum to do this, but if not, I accept that and that's fine. But it's just a general query, really.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, Barry, and it's one that's worrying a lot of people. And we were debating it quite heavily on the leadership call this morning. I think what we can say at the moment is that legally there is a distinction between directors and the duties of a director and employees. And a director can be both an officer of the company and an employee of the company. But whether or not in a particular, there's a difference, of course, if you're the sole director and shareholder of a limited company, or if there are several. I know of cases where there are joint shareholders and directors. One of them is furloughed and doing nothing. The other one is keeping the home fires burning and taking remuneration out of the company, albeit a salary. So it will vary depending on the circumstances. For sole director companies, it's a really difficult one to say whether or not they would be doing anything that contributed to the revenue generation of the business. And whether or not they would be able to furlough themselves. And this is something that Trudy and I are debating and exploring, and Trudy will update on in due course. So yeah, the fewer directors there are, the more difficult I think it will be for furlough to be justified for that individual. And of course, all the other employees of the company can be furloughed. It's just the question, if you've got one director, can you furlough? And we're really not sure at this stage.
I mean, I certainly have myself. We furloughed Sean because Sean's in the F word with me, and his income stream's completely stopped. So he's been furloughed, and we can claim his 800 quid or whatever. But because he's literally got nothing to do, bless him, apart from the garden. But obviously, all the time I'm still manning stuff. Then you've got to still work, haven't you? And you've got to be doing literally nothing to be furloughed. Any other questions, anyone? Nothing? If not, then so. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. It's been a great call, and we'll maybe do more of these as different issues crop up that people are going to find useful. We'll probably share the slides in the group, and the recording will be there too. Great. Right, thanks very much, everyone, then. Go and do your plan if you haven't already done it, and obviously catch up on the group if you've got any queries or questions.
Will do.
Okay, then.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Have a good day. Bye. How do I stop the call? There we go.